Everybody, my name is Francesca Rossi. I work at IBM Research, and I am the IBM AI Ethics Global Leader. And today I will talk about these issues around the use and development of AI and how to go from high-level principles to practice around AI ethics. So let me give you an idea of my interpretation of AI. Okay, so AI is a technology that has been around for a while, since the 1950s, and it started for a while with algorithms that were defined and coded by people and then coded into the machine so that the machine could solve problems, even difficult problems. But then in the 80s, another kind of techniques came about, and these are the so-called machine learning approaches, where people, developers, researchers, don't tell the machine exactly all the steps that they need to do to solve a problem, but they just give them, for example, in one instance of these algorithms, they give a lot of examples, and then the machine extrapolates from these examples of problems and solutions for those problems how to solve the problems itself. And deep learning is one specialized case of the machine learning. So why do I say that? Because again, AI now still has two kinds of techniques and also the combinations of them, and the ethics issues related to AI are relevant to some of these characteristic of these algorithms. So AI ethics is a very multidisciplinary field of study that tries to understand how to optimize the beneficial impact of this technology while reducing as much as possible all the negative outcomes. And so the idea is that to identify the main concerns about the development of AI and to study possible solutions that are usually technical but also non-technical. So there can be tools, there can be algorithms and so on, but there can also be non-technical solutions such as standards, policies, best practices, incentives, and so on. And the study is very multidisciplinary because AI experts alone cannot really understand how to identify and also find all these solutions from this whole range of possible solutions. In terms of helping the developers themselves, those that produce AI technology, the idea is to help them to design and build AI systems that are aware of our values and they follow our values when they are deployed. So some of the things around AI ethics, some of the concerns are generic, meaning that concerns that are relevant for any pervasive technology that in a very fast way really is applied to every area of our life. But some of them are specific to AI. For example, AI needs a lot of data. These are the examples that I mentioned earlier to work well. So, and usually this data is also personal data. So the first concern is about how this data is being handled, data privacy and governance. Second one, some of these machine learning algorithms are not easily are kind of opaque, cannot explain very well how they get from the input data to the output or to the decision or to the recommendation for a decision to a human being. So they are kind of a black box. So concerns about explainability and transparency are very important, because if they cannot explain why they get to the output, then probably these algorithms cannot, these systems will not be trusted by human beings, so will not be adopted. Or to the other extreme, maybe they will be adopted, but they will be adopted like a rubber stamp, so people will not really question their recommendations or their decision, which is also bad. So the next concern is about fairness and and value alignment. How can we make sure that AI can recognize and distinguish between decisions and recommendations that are good according to our values, for example, fairness, or the ones that are not good? The next one is the fact that many of these machine learning algorithms are based on statistics, and so that means that they always have a small percentage of error. So when this error happens, then the issue is one of responsibility and accountability for that error. And finally, AI can infer our preferences very well, can also possibly manipulate them, so issues about moral age and human agency. And the last one is that AI is very pervasive, as I said, so whenever there is a negative impact, the negative impact is very large if it applies to all applications of AI, and they can have also an impact on the jobs, since AI can perform tasks that previously were performed by human beings. So many institutions around the world, they define some principles on how to make sure that AI is beneficial and there is no negative impact. This is a visual representation of many sets of principles that were published by companies, intergovernmental institutions, multi-stakeholder organizations, governments themselves, and the civil society. They're all different from each other, but they have common themes that are more or less what I mentioned you in the previous slide. So human rights, values, responsibility, human control, fairness, transparency and sustainability, and so on. So these are very useful principles to understand how is our commitment to do well with AI, but they're not enough, because going from the principles to very concrete actions so that the AI that is delivered has the right property, that is used the right way, is not that easy. It's a long path. So let me tell you a little bit about the IBM path to go from these principles to practice. So the first thing we did was to publish our principles. These were published already in 2017, and they're called the Principles of Trust and Transparency, and they basically say few things, 3 things only. And the first one is that the purpose of AI for us is to augment human intelligence, not to replace it. The second one is a data policy, where the data and the insights from the data belong to whoever generates the data. And the third one is about the need for transparency and explainability. So these are very useful principles, but they are useful to understand where we stand, what our commitment is. But they're not very useful for everyday job of developers, because they need to really understand in concrete terms what to do. So the next step was to define what we mean by trust, since these are principles for trust and transparency. What does it mean to trust a decision made by a machine? And we spelled this trust concept into 4 pillars. One is fairness. We need the machine to be fair, not make discrimination when making recommendations or decisions. Second one is about explainability. We need to be able to understand why a machine made a certain decision. Third one is about robustness, and the fourth one is about transparency. We need to understand what was done during the development of the machine. And the next thing, after these principles and after the pillars of trust, we said, okay, but then we need to help our developers by innovating in terms of research around bias, explainability, to give them algorithms that they can use. We need to educate them. So, for example, the pink cover here is the cover of a booklet to educate developers around AI ethics. We need to also give them toolkits. So the ones that you see here are 3 toolkits, and we did one for each one of the 4 pillars of trust, one about explainability, one about fairness, one about transparency, one about robustness. And these toolkits are just a collection. First of all, they are open source. They've been donated to the Linux Foundations, and they are an open source collection of code, guidelines, and metrics, data sets that developers can use to share and learn together how to deal with these various AI ethics issues. The next work that we did was to really tell developers how to use those toolkits or other algorithms in their everyday job. So, and we did that by putting together a methodology for them to use, by making it as easy as possible for them to adopt that methodology, and then putting a governance on top to ensure that they have the right incentives to adopt that methodology, to revise their AI pipeline during the development phases in order to include AI ethics, handling of AI ethics issues, besides all the other steps that they do during the development. And the last thing we did was also to build an overall centralized governance body within IBM, the IBM AI Ethics Board, that has representatives from all the divisions of the company, and that has as mission to really centralize, make the whole company more aware of the issues that are relevant for our business model, to educate the various people in the various divisions, to coordinate the activities in the various divisions, to help the business units understand when a certain offering is acceptable or not according to our principles and guidelines, and using a risk-based approach, allowing the business units to understand when they have to bring something to the attention of the board, or when there is no need to do that because something is obviously acceptable or obviously not acceptable. And then the board regularly analyzes and vets these potential offerings and builds, this knowledge that helps more and more over time to understand what is really acceptable according to our principles. And then the last dimension is the long list of external partnerships that we are involved in with academia, with companies, with government, with civil society organizations, because as I said earlier, AI ethics is a very multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder field of study. So in order to identify the issues to be resolved and then to find the best solutions, we really need to hear all the voices. And so we have collaborations with academia such as MIT, and then we have started new conferences, like the one supported by AAAI and ICM on AI ethics and society. We collaborated with IEEE, which is the Worldwide Association of Electrical Engineers, so the developers, to build a very thick book about all the issues that developers can find in their everyday job and some possible ways that they can resolve them. We started with the other main tech companies, the partnership on AI, together with Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. That was started in 2017 by these 6 main tech companies, but now has over 100 partners, where only 20 are companies, and everybody else, all the other 80 partners, come from all these other voices that need to be heard. They are university research centers, they are UN agencies, they are civil society organizations, and so on. And all together, these different voices, the different partners, work on various projects around the main issues relevant to AI ethics that evolve over time, of course, in a balanced way. So each project has for-profit and not-for-profit partners that work together to define guidelines, to define best practices together, and to really understand what's the best way to make AI beneficial. The picture on the bottom right are 2 deliverables from a European initiative put together by the European Commission. This was called the High-Level Expert Group on AI, that worked for 2 years, where we joined and to give our expertise and to learn also from all the other members. Those were 52 members from really very different backgrounds that delivered the AI ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI in Europe, that are now taken really as the base for possible future, to understand the possible future regulation by the European government and Commission in around AI. So this part we think is very important, because no single company can understand by itself how to address the AI ethics issues, so it has to learn together with others, all the other stakeholders, but then it has to go inside the company to declinate, to incarnate this understanding for its business model, to understand what are the governance pieces that has to be put in place inside the company. I will end here with some useful links that can be useful to reach some of the things that I mentioned during my talk, but they can all be found very easily on the web. Thank you.